Citizens of Earth, greetings.
Greetings.
Do not adjust your, what? What do you adjust? Do not adjust your
audio catcher thing.
You do not adjust your podcast. Boy, that's really reaching back, isn't it?
Yeah, do people even know that?
No, I don't think people even know what that is. It's like, it's the, what was it? The Outer
radio
Limits.
shows? Oh, that's the Outer Limits.
The old TV show, The Outer Limits. Do not adjust your television.
Rod Serling.
Yes. No, Rod Serling's The Twilight Zone. We're going to get into a really nerdy argument at the top of this before I've even introduced the show. Welcome to Chinwag, by the way. Welcome to Chinwag. Steve and I are having a debate about ancient television shows.
Night Gallery. That's the other
Night Gallery was
one.
Rod Serling. That was Rod Serling. And The Twilight Zone is Rod Serling. And Outer Limits is somebody else. It wasn't Rod Serling.
Hey, and if anybody knows, like, what's the one that's really popular right now? Black Mirror. That's like, really, Black Mirror is based on these shows we're talking about erroneously right now, which is Outer Limits.
It's what you call an anthology show. Like every week is a different story. So, kind of like the Chinwag, Steve. Kind of like see how I tied? Didn't I elegantly tie that back together? Beautiful transition. As I say, citizens of Earth, welcome to the Chinwag. I am Paul Giamatti, and this.
I am Stephen Asma, professor of philosophy.
And I've never heard you own it quite like that.
Yes. Well, I feel like it's kind of relevant today because we get into some interesting philosophical territory.
We do. We talk to a very fascinating author and performer, Derek DelGaudio. Fascinating guy. And indeed, you're right. It gets into some really philosophical territory. But first, let's get unphilosophical, Steve, and talk about giving us shout outs and ratings.
Yes, please go to Apple and rate us and give us good reviews and, well, hopefully good reviews, but we love to get the feedback, the letters.
Yes.
We've been getting some great letters and comments, and we're starting to answer the letters.
Which we'll do more of, too, which is really, really great. Now, let's move on to introducing our esteemed guest, Derek DelGaudio.
A man of high probity.
A man of high, nice, very nice. Yes. A man of high probity. Derek is often described as a writer, performer, and illusionist. But as we get into it, I think you're going to find that he's a lot more than that. He is known for his critically acclaimed live show In and of Itself, directed by Mr. Frank Oz.
Yeah, it's awesome.
Amazing.
It's a powerful show.
It's an amazing film. I didn't get to see it live, but it's a pretty great film.
Yeah,
I think
it
works really well as a film. It was recorded, this performance, and it was executive produced for Hulu by our good friend, Stephen Colbert. Friend of the show, a good friend of the show.
Awesome.
He recently wrote a really fantastic memoir called Amoral Man, True Stories and Other Lies. And here he is now. We're going to really get into it. Welcome, Derek DelGaudio.
Welcome.
Hi, Paul.
Hello. It's very nice to meet you.
Yeah, pleasure.
This is my buddy Steve.
I just right before I was on this, I was talking to my mother, and I asked her. I told her I was going to talk to you, and said, "Is there anything you want me to ask Paul Giamatti?" And her first question was, "Why does he have a podcast?" Mm-hmm. That's her question.
Okay.
And what is it?
Okay.
And where can I listen? Those were her questions for
Very
you.
Good. I'll take them in reverse order. She can listen to it on various platforms, Apple Podcasts and things. I think it's kind of everywhere that you can just get your free podcast. What's it about? You're about to find out. Steve and I met each other a couple of years ago online because I saw him give a lecture. Steve's a philosophy professor at Columbia College, an arts college in Chicago. And I saw him give a lecture about the imagination and the function of the imagination in consciousness. And I thought it was super interesting. And it touched on a lot of things that I find interesting, that I think you find interesting, which is the reason we wanted to talk to you. Why do I have one? That's an excellent question, Derek DelGaudio's mother. I sort of thought I'd like to do something different with myself, that I acted for a long time, and it's great, but I have lots of other interests. And to that end, a lot of the things that we talk about are things that I think you, in your stage performance, in the book, which is a great book, by the way.
Excellent.
Really great book.
Thanks.
You touch on a lot of things like belief, imagination, self, identity, consciousness, even, all these things.
I have a question for you. In fact, we read your book and we've seen your wonderful film, which is based on your stage play and magic performance. And one of the things that you talk about in the book is that there's this difference that you see between what the actor does and what the magician does. And I gather that the similarity is partly that you're deceiving people, but that the actor is sort of deceiving them for some other purpose, and the magician has a different kind of purpose, or maybe just money.
Yeah, there's different agreements that we make with others when we participate in some sort of fiction. But when it comes to people go into theater and they understand that it's their job to suspend disbelief, is what they say, And I think when someone goes to, let's say, like a magic show, for instance, they believe that their job is to not be deceived or not be fooled. No. And you talk about theater and deception, and what we see play out in public so often is just some sort of theater.
Charade.
It's what we're being shown, and it's not necessarily what's being just told or revealed. It's what we're being shown and what's put in front of us. And it's just these things leak out into the real world in a way that, like, whether it's a play and you're watching someone say lines, or a magic show where you're knowingly being deceived to have some sort of effect, but it's all the same. The news has become a magic show. The news has become a form of theater, and we buy into it because it makes us feel better. And even when it's horrible, because there's a theater to it that lives within us.
No, it's and there's more organs through which to give a bullshit performance of reality to people. Well, and there are so many more ways to perform reality for people now that's really fucked up. The news thing's interesting. We were just talking about how I was saying that it's fascinating how the news is mostly 6 guys sitting at a table now just reworking the same piece of news over and over and over again and performing it for us over and over and over again. And the actual news is non-existent now. I mean, it's like it's indistinguishable from this bullshit. Sorry, Steve, were you going to say something?
I relate to what you're saying, both of you guys, and I do wonder, the media machine is creating this performance, like Derek said, but it's designed to outrage you and make you upset, and then you tune in for more. And this has always been true, though. Like, if it bleeds, it leads. You always get the worst story. Right. So everything's catastrophized. But it does seem worse than ever because you have 24/7 news cycle. And so people are just going insane with this stuff, myself included.
Yeah. And thinking about the different contexts for, like, acting versus something, it's like intention has so much to do with it, and, like, whether it's the intention of the actor, and, like, or actor could be actor on stage or actor in society, but, like, what is the intention behind it? I mean, Goebbels used to be, like, a guy who was really good at this particular thing, and no one really understood what he was doing.
Right.
And it was just amazing how this guy could use
masterful manipulation
to craft a narrative that would sink into people's hearts, and use that to pin it against others, to then, pillage and do whatever he needed to do. And now that's, like, just a thing people know how to do.
Everybody can do it. Yeah. Now everybody can do it. Now I can sign on to fucking TikTok and I can be my own little Dr. Goebbels. It's absolutely right. Everybody can do it.
Yeah.
It's insane.
So it seems like there's a bigger problem, an existential problem that we're facing, that, like, I keep coming back to, and, like, our inability to differentiate reality from some sort of simulated reality or a fictional world that's being crafted for us, or a narrative that we've entered. Absolutely. And we don't know that we've entered it.
But we're collaborating in it, is what's really alarming. We're collaborating in it. And actually, one of the most interesting things in your book is that moment of kind of a vision you have of the cave, of Plato's cave, which is, I mean, Steve, you want to describe Plato's cave quickly?
Yeah, we
Sorry.
could. I'll describe it really quickly, and then Derek, tell me how your work relates to it. It's from the Republic, and it's just Plato describes this weird scene where people are chained in a cave. They're born there, and they can only see forward this sort of wall of the cave, and behind them is a fire, which is projecting puppets and cutout shapes. Like here's a tree, here's the sun, here's a guy, and they move them around like a little dance. And as you see the shadows on the wall, you think that's reality. But then somebody comes and takes one of the prisoners and unchains them and drags them back and shows them, here's the fire, here's the puppets. All that you thought was real is just appearances. And then the guy's like, no, you're full of shit. It's it's the shadows that are real. This stuff is bullshit. And then they drag him out to the sun, and he sees the real world, and they're like, this is reality. Everything you've been doing is just appearances and simulations. And then they bring him back down again. And you really interweave that story in your own story beautifully. So yeah, what do you make of this?
After I finished the show that I did in New York, and after I finished with the movie, I was trying to figure out what was next. And a few people had mentioned that I should write a book. And I hadn't really considered it. I just didn't feel like I wanted to take that on. But it was echoing in my head as I was going through day-to-day life, just as an opportunity that existed and something that maybe I should consider doing. But it really wasn't anything more than that. And I was watching the Brett Kavanaugh hearings for his confirmation. And as I was watching it, I recognized the similarities of this performance that was given in the context of real life in a manner that we would accept it as true. And I understood that there was a part of my life that I hadn't been talking about that aligned with this, and that perhaps there was something I could offer there. So I decided to write this book. And the book is about, it's called A Moral Man, and it's about, in my 20s, I worked as what's known as a bust-out dealer, and it's a professional, I guess, card cheat, card sharp, however you want to call it, mechanic who is hired to rig the game so that they win. And it's a complicated, a little complicated of how I ended up there, but I ended up in this position. And while I was there, I recognized, sitting at the table, that people were living life as though it was real, but everything about their existence in that moment was actually part of a theatrical experience, a production that they didn't understand was happening, but they were living inside of it as though it were real life. And by that, I mean, these people came to a house in the Hollywood Hills, a mansion, and there was a big party thrown, and it was very festive, and there were professionals all over, waiters, bartenders. It was a real party. And in the back room, there was a card game, and people would play cards, but that card game was designed to have people lose their money, and everything around that was to help that illusion.
Like theater, yeah.
Because the truth is,
this illusion.
Yeah, and what I recognize is that these people didn't lose because we cheated. They lost because it wasn't a game. It just looked like one. And I watched them participate in this game as though it were uncertain. They were who they were, and they were going through life not knowing what was coming. All the while, the story had been written already. Everything was already decided. And yet they were participating. They were like actors without a script, basically, in a show that they didn't know they were in.
Jeez.
And
it's diabolical.
But all agreeing that this was real. I mean, that seems to be right. I mean, there's a consensus reality. Everybody's agreeing with each other that what we're seeing, that's what's so fucking crazy about it. And again, goes to a lot of what we were just saying, right? I mean, there's a consensus reality. We're all agreeing that this makes sense all the time.
And to be on the other side of an invisible wall and to be able to, because I was using a name that wasn't my own. My story was given to me of who I was and what I was doing there. So it really was like an actor learning lines and learning a history and then having to make that my own. But the stakes were different, obviously. But there's something oddly liberating about it, of being in a mask, but not on a stage, and just in the real world and being able to be someone else and present to someone else and have people treat you that way, good or bad, but the truth.
You're a spy in a sense. You're kind of a spy in reality. You're kind of like,
Yeah, and because there was power dynamics that get revealed to you, like people who thought they were my boss didn't understand that they were just hired to manage things. They weren't actually they weren't in on the heist, so to speak. And so they just thought I was some kid, someone's nephew. And they were doing me a favor by giving me a job. And they didn't understand the hierarchy of usefulness, at least in that house, at all, because to them I was just a dealer, because there were other dealers as well who were legitimate dealers.
Like a waiter.
I was a waiter,
just be whatever,
essentially. So
everybody's playing everybody.
But you were being played too, as you discovered ultimately too.
And then there's elements of that where you realize as much as they thought they were living honest lives in the real world, I felt I was also. And you then realize there's always another veil. And that we live in a succession of endless veils. And there's just one after another. And I think coming to accept that and own it and deal with it in a way, or at least think about it and what kind of society we live in, where that, the word fluidity is very popular now, but having that fluidity with reality also is at least a necessary thing to explore, because they're one and the same. Of what we are in any given moment, or who we are, or where we are, and it's all based on our perception of what's happening around us.
It's a really hard thing to accept, though, for people. That reality is mutable and identity is mutable. I mean, it's a really hard thing to accept.
But then you don't get out of the cave ever. You're just going up and then into another cave.
Well, no.
And then you're going up.
But that's the horrifying thing, is that this because another word that's really buzzy is authenticity too, which is like, can you get to something authentic? And it seems like you can't. It seems like you're never going to get to something authentic.
I think for me, what I took from it was, if truth equates to light, as it does in the cave and in lots of, philosophical discussions, I just realized I can't expect to find light. I can only do my best to generate it.
Nice.
And so the onus is on me to fight to understand what is real, because reality, I believe, is a place that's where we meet. That's where we find each other. Is reality, and sometimes that reality can be an illusion, and it might always be an illusion. But the way we find each other by sharing an experience together, that like we both go on a roller coaster together and we experience that reality together. The same could be true for seeing a great movie, where we experience something that is all, pure
illusion.
Light, and it's fictional light, but it's still light nonetheless.
Right.
And it's a way of finding each other. And I think that we have a stronger connection, and our ability to really find each other and connect in a meaningful way, whether it's on an individual level or in a society. I think that the truer the reality we exist in,
the closer to something true we can
the
get.
stronger the connection is. And that's what is more exhausting each day is the world that conspires against us getting together and instead feeds us synthetic connections, or it offers us synthetic connections that we take,
participate in. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think you have to get the fuck offline and you got to meet up in a place,
agree.
You gotta, I mean, I say this on a wire, but like,
no.
I make the effort to do so outside of this is, I think, important. I agree.
You talk about the imagination a lot in your work, and I was thinking that the imagination doesn't like have a moral compass. It can make these beautiful movies and artworks and books, but it can also, Leni Riefenstahl, like it can, or Goebbels, like it can go in either direction. It doesn't. It's what we do with the imagination, I think.
Well, we compartmentalize everything to make sense of it. So morality and imagination, those are separate discussions. We'll have
they shouldn't be.
Right. Yeah.
We'll have professors on morality and we'll have professors on imagination.
Right. Yeah.
Don't let them talk to each other.
Right.
And these compartmentalizing of things, I understand it because I guess it's our.
I think it's human.
It's how we make sense of things.
Yeah, I think it's just human.
But allowing ourselves the notion of seeing what happens when, the streams are crossed or what, but it's scary for people. And I think that we don't have I think we're very uncertain, and I think that everything we've done since harnessing fire and, everything we've done has since then to protect ourselves from the dark, from the scary things. We used to go to sleep when the sun went down and wake up when the sun came up. And as soon as we were able to harness fire and electricity, we removed ourselves from the rhythm of the earth. And it deceives
you into thinking you can create environments where, it's daylight now because I have a thing that I can make daylight.
I have a thing that helps me be, and now we have the Weather Channel. So we know what it's maybe probably going to rain tomorrow, where before we didn't. So you had to be careful and make sure that your fruit was protected or whatever. But now we do everything we can to eliminate uncertainty from our lives.
Yeah. But I do think there's a human need in the similar way that there's those, that hierarchy of needs. There's like food, shelter, companionship. I do actually think narrative is actually a human need. I think actually we need to put these things on things, and that's tricky as fucking hell though, then to like negotiate that around.
There's a connection here too between the kind of like intolerance that, let's say, a certain kind of conservative has for ambiguity versus, tolerance that maybe a liberal has for uncertainty and magic. Because when I was coming up, it was like the era of Uri Geller and, James Randi and then like Penn and Teller. And it was like, there was this thing of here's magic and it could be a miracle, but then here's a wave of debunkers coming to say this stuff is bullshit. You're all being, basically manipulated. Yeah. And I guess now I'm more on the side of the mystery, like let it be ambiguous. Like I don't want to have a resolution.
You were more of a sort of skeptic.
Yeah.
This needs.
Well, I'm a professor, so I teach students, and I was like, I have to make sure these gullible kids understand that you can't bend spoons with your mind. But now I'm like, I like P.T. Barnum. I figure like buyer beware. It's on the individual. I guess as a magician, what's your sense of that stuff?
Yeah, I mean, it's all a litmus test for belief and what people are willing to believe or what they want to believe. And I think that, there's a history of magicians debunking people that starts basically with Houdini, who would go to people who are holding seances or spook shows and things, and he would effectively expose them and show that they were frauds. But the irony is he was doing that because he wanted to talk to his dead mother.
That's right.
So he wasn't doing this because
he wanted to believe.
He did believe.
He wanted it to believe.
He did believe. And he wanted it to be true. He believed in the possibility of it. And so he kept looking for it.
So he was exposing these particular charlatans, but
Sure.
he believed in
He never met a real one.
He was looking for a real one.
But he was
basically.
looking for a real one.
Yeah.
And I think the looking for a real one is what matters in life. Of having an idea of something that's greater than whatever is around us and looking for it. Eventually you could find it. It's there. You just got to look for it. And if it's not there, maybe you can manifest it. Maybe that thing that you imagine that should be here, that you're looking for, you don't see. Maybe you're the one.
You're the guy
who actually drags it into this world for the rest of us to see the thing, to experience the thing that you knew was true in your heart and you felt was true, but no one else saw it. And the moment someone else there is a witness to it, then it becomes real. And it becomes real in a deeper sense, and it anchors itself in reality in a way that it couldn't before. And I think that became a trope of like magicians debunking others, but in itself became a type of performance.
Yeah.
The skeptic magician who I know secrets and you have a secret and I'm going to expose yours.
Yeah. There's
a great hypocrisy in that they're hoarding their own secrets and building their own empire while deconstructing ostensibly the work of others, whether or not you agree with it morally. Like,
no, that's a good point.
It is
really
like, remove the moral argument. It's like, and using the banner of it's business. It's fucking business.
Right, but using the banner of sort of
the moral high ground.
Progressive intellectual sort of like,
And what that's done is it's created a new version of that where the man who exposed snake oil as this snake oil and it's fraudulent and I'm the man who can show you that it's fraudulent.
Yes.
That man will turn around and sell you snake oil, salesman oil.
Anti-snake oil.
And he'll then use that position of authority, of intellectual authority, by showing that I'm able to show you, and present
that becomes its own
thing.
Yeah.
And I'm not a big fan of that because you're either all in or you're not. Like you're in or you're out, and the rest is like hypocritical. So you either present as like, this is a show, I do this stuff, it's a show, or I can bend a spoon with my mind. But the half measures are where I get frustrated, where you're watching people do that and then also do their own version of it and just mask it as some sort of other part. Well, what they were doing was supernatural. What I'm doing is I'm aware of things, hypersensitive to whatever,
Yes. But it becomes its own shtick. That's like,
And that's kind of almost more offensive.
Almost worse to me. No, I agree. Way. It's almost worse. Yeah, it's almost worse.
Oily.
And
I'd never thought of it quite like that, but yeah.
And so, I think that it's interesting to watch like the UFOs that we've all seen now, whatever, the videos of those things.
Yeah.
It's hilarious that like our entire lives growing up, our entire Spielbergian upbringing of like aliens coming to Earth and like what that means. And it's the biggest event in the history of mankind.
It is.
And it like, it happens essentially. Even if it's like China. As it was, where it's like gray and like, it's still like that footage is like less effective than the Bigfoot costume guy walking across.
Because
costume. We're so immune to it or whatever.
Yeah.
Like it's
we are so numb to it that it's like, I know.
I can't believe, and then you watch the pilots, talk about it afterwards. Like these are intelligent, professional, smart people who saw something that is beyond something, and we're at a point now where no expert can kind of really defend it. All they can go is like, well, it's unidentified. And so whatever it is, it doesn't matter. It just shows our shrug is that's the concerning part for me of like, wow, one way or another, people don't give a shit. Like, believe it or not.
Don't give a shit. I know.
Yeah. There's a, all right.
To land
whatever.
in this place of apathy is really fucking alarming.
That's the part that I'm like, oh, this sucks. This is like,
but some of it is like you said, we're apathetic maybe and desensitized, but some of it also is like people don't want to end up looking like a boob. They don't want to be the person that was duped.
Maybe that has something to do with the way that we structure narratives. Because like when we make movies about heroes, we don't show how wrong they are all the time.
Yeah, that's true.
Everything, or Einstein was proven wrong on, I don't know a lot from what I hear. Like and we don't make movies about that, because we want the hero, and we want to be the hero, and we want to live in that world. We don't want to hurt. We don't get hurt. And now publicly you get flogged. You get, for saying something stupid. And so it's like,
well, there's always that moment when somebody does something admirable or heroic, and then the inevitable backlash comes as everybody investigates their background on the internet and finds out that they're not a saint.
Peccadillos,
they're not a saint, and the inability to accept that, or the kind of glee taken in taking the person apart is actually fucked up too.
Yeah, I know what you mean. Like, I mean, how many times do we need to hear about, some senator who's against whatever fornication and abortion, and we find out that like he knocked a girl up on the side and had an abortion, whatever it is. Just like, we just can't help ourselves as a society for whatever it is we're into, good or bad. I feel like there's something perpetual happening, and it's probably always happened. I mean, but like what makes something real in my experience is it's consistency and it's repetition, and now things are put into the cycle and then spun out, in a matter of minutes.
So rapid fire.
But that's interesting.
Days.
Say that again. What do you mean? What makes something real is repetition and consistency, meaning
stability. What is
that's interesting. Repetition's interesting. Something you said in your book that I loved was practicing reality. Does this look real? Does this look? And I loved that idea of having to practice reality. But when you say that what makes something real is repetition and consistency.
I mean,
you can't deny it because it's happened again.
Well, like those books on your shelf behind you, they are there, and
they're always there.
And they're always there.
Yeah. Uh-huh.
And we think of something solid as something that isn't just something repeating itself over and over again very quickly,
right?
In a way, but it is on a molecular level.
Yes.
And that is where we recognize something as solid, is when its density and consistency create a form that we experience, and then that becomes a literal part of our reality. But then I have a friend who appears in people's dreams and he talks to birds and appears in people's dreams. That's what he does.
That's what he talks to birds in reality, or he talks to birds in the dream?
He sits at a cafe and he drinks coffee and talks to the occasional person and speaks to birds every once in a while. Mm-hmm. But he also appears in people's dreams, and he does that by repeating himself in the world. He sits at the same cafe all the time wearing the same thing, and he repeats his image for others to see. And at a certain point, what happens is he isn't just part of their reality. He somehow sinks into their subconscious, and he appears in their world, even when they're not trying to have him appear.
And that's his intention. That's wild.
I like that.
Great.
I like that a lot.
Great.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Yeah,
and then if someone tells him they had a dream, he has them document it, and he makes it a part of his own literature. But we're constantly speaking about this crisis of symbols. It used to be that our stories, our myths that we had of like a person going up a hill and fighting a dragon and coming down with whatever treasure, that was very close to what life was when those things were written, where you had a drudgery, like every day life was hard and you had to like fight off a wolf from eating your baby or whatever. Like it was your physical engagement with the world. There was like a consistency with the myths that aligned and the symbols that aligned and the stories that we told to each other helped us navigate the world. But now everything is fractured, and
fragmented.
Our day-to-day existences are very different from one another. Our lived experiences are very different. So we're having trouble aligning with one another on our narratives and our stories. And, let me tell you this, this fable that might help you. And they don't really care because it has nothing to do with their day-to-day drudgery and it doesn't help them in any way. So we're losing the ability to share on a level beyond language.
Superhero movies. They're superhero movies.
I'm
only kind of half kidding, but they're superhero movies. I don't know that, it's like
archetypes.
They do. People dismiss those superhero movies. It's absolutely absurd because they're trafficking in in symbols and in archetypes.
Yeah, Jung would be happy. Carl Jung.
Carl Jung would be happy.
And they're speaking to deep places within humans. There's some amazing, thoughtful, well-crafted, beautiful human stories within this, costumed world.
I think the potential for it is huge too.
It needs to be treated with the dignity and integrity that those stories deserve.
But that's the problem is that you have corporations, and we get back to corporations.
That's a problem with every movie, right?
I know.
Unless you're doing it the hard way, the hardest possible way. We used to just sit around a campfire and tell each other stories. And it was a way of connecting both in terms of our physical space and our interior space with one another. We're able to get to each other. Our campfires are spread out. We don't have campfires anymore. They're spread out.
I know, we don't have fires anymore.
I feel it. I feel it because I think about it a lot. So I'm aware of it and its absence. And I feel how... And
I'm embarrassed to say I watch a lot of TikTok. And TikTok, when they're good, they're like little fucking Shakespearean tragedies in 2 minutes. And you're like, holy shit. Some of it's deeply affecting. And I just wonder if the medium is keeping some of us old timers from seeing these more universal elements, in it.
Yeah, I think the medium is the first thing that we react to because especially when it's new, and everything new is ugly in a sense. We just, or at least because we don't,
or strange.
How strange, weird. How do we relate to this?
Yeah.
But I had the great fortune of working with Frank Oz on the show that I did. And, he'd hate me saying this, but he's very hip, he's very aware and he does his damnedest to look past form to recognize what's actually in front of him. What is actually here that I'm looking at and not dismissing it because of the form, which is why I think part of the reason that we connected is for this reason, is because we both experienced crisis of form where our chosen fields perhaps were limited by the perception of others. And so we had to look past the form or the perception of it and figure out ways of communicating whatever it is we're trying to communicate, despite a form that may have been a deterrent for other people in some way, or would give them the wrong context. And I'm sure, Paul, just based on you being an actor, for example, I it is probably surprising for people to hear you have a philosophy podcast, and that you're a reader. There's a stereotype there, but I also know that I've been told actors are vessels. So the more space you leave for other things to enter your mind, the more honest the performer can be. I've seen you be amazing in everything you've done, and it's always honest and real. And your intellect doesn't get in the way of the other part, which is just some sort of being in the moment. I don't think you acting has never looked to me like an intellectual process.
Yeah.
It looks like you're living in whatever this fiction is.
That's nice of you to say.
Yeah.
It isn't because it is a place where I'm not intellect. My intellect gets hopeful. It's the place where my intellect didn't get in the way of things, which is why I love doing it. Which is why I have such a compulsion to do it, because it's satisfying some kind of very instinctual thing.
But whatever that is that allows you to do that is some sort of muscle that I think like intellectuals could use more of.
Could use more
yes.
of like, Stephen, you're a philosopher or like philosophy. So like
we're the worst.
Yeah, I mean,
you are the worst. In a way, you kind of are the worst, but yes.
I went, I've met with a few philosophers. I've searched for philosophers, met a lot of philosophy professors, but philosophers, they're harder to come by.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I met
They're working at the garage or a mechanic.
Well, your friend talking to the birds has got a kind of philosophical approach to things.
Oh, it's unbelievable. Reading the world that we're in, not reading books, reading the world, listening to it, looking at it, seeing what it has to offer, where we live, what is this? And then trying to understand the world we're living in right now. And that's that realization that you can do that you get put on this earth, and that when you look up and you see the sky, you're experiencing the same thing that whatever ancestors we had, however many years ago, had. And all that people did was try to figure out what is this? What are we doing here? What is this? And now, because we have acquired so much knowledge, I mean, we're fracking it now, basically.
Yeah.
That we tend to just lean on that or look to that for the answers, and the people before us that know things are there to teach us that. But the truth is, they didn't know shit either. When I was making it in of itself, I was thinking about identity a lot. And I'd read things, but I'd never actually spoken to an expert on that subject. And so a friend of mine introduced me to a professor at a college, and I started telling him what I was interested in. And I brought up the ship of Theseus thought experiment, where, if you're not familiar, it's the Greek hero Theseus. He went out, I think it was to cut the head off of Medusa, came back. They put his ship in the harbor and as a trophy of their great hero, Theseus. And it stayed there for hundreds of years. But eventually, the salt water started to erode the boat. So slowly, over time, they had to replace the wood on the boat. Until eventually, all of the wood was new wood.
Not the boat, right? Is it still the boat?
And someone remarked, there's Theseus' ship, and the philosopher said, yes, but is it still? And so the question is like, when does it stop being a thing? And then there was an addition to that, which was, what if they took the old wood and moved it to a different location and made a boat out of that old wood?
Would that be Theseus'
So now there's two boats. There's an old one, but it's not in the place, and there's a new one, but it's in the place. Which one is Theseus? So we discussed this, and he tells me that there's a modern version of this, which is there's a man who is suffered an accident or something, and half a brain is split, or a brain is split between two bodies. Are you familiar with this, Stephen?
Yeah, I've heard of it. Yes.
What do you know what it's called or anything? I don't remember.
It might be like the split brain problem. That might be what it's called. I can't remember, honestly.
Okay.
What's
it's the same exact. It's the same exact thing. It's that but if there's
two personalities,
if there's two people walking around, they both think they're Brian. Which one's actually Brian? And he had drawn these little sketches of stick figures on our placemats that we were at the restaurant we were at, and he was showing the brain being split and transported. And he goes, which one's Brian? And I said, this one. And he goes, how do you know that? And I said, because that's the one I'm calling Brian. And he's like, well, that's not the point of the experiment. And I was like,
yeah, but that's Brian.
But I said, perhaps, but what if it was an experiment? And he said, what do you mean? And I said, well, you're you, right? He said, yes. I said, but what if I could convince everyone in this room that you weren't a college professor at a university? What if I could convince them that you were this guy with this story? And then what if I could do it to everyone in the city and everyone in the world? Who would you be? Who would you be at that point? And he just couldn't, he argued with me and gave me some
I'm sure,
very bookish, smart, very intelligent debate on that. I was just struck by not the arguments, but the rigidity of his of his belief.
Yeah,
and there's a acceptance that everything they've read is, for them to contend with and, maybe believe or not believe, but figure it out. But it's like you're shuttling this information from one book to yourself to another book.
Yeah.
And it's not.
That's the thing that's always struck me with philosophy is it's like, it's just one system piled on top of another system, piled on top of another system. And I'm like, it's terminal feeling. I'm like, so this is just all terminal feeling.
As you add like a new book, because, you can't understand Hegel without understanding Kant, you can't understand Kant without Hume, but then all you do is you check it against your own intuition and you're like, okay, well, I'm done here. Whereas the rest of us are like, well, what's the rest of the world like? Fuck your own intuition. Yeah. Like, how do they think about it in Cambodia? Like, how, what are they thinking in China? And most professional philosophers just don't even know about the world. It's a very provincial kind of education that they have.
That makes sense.
But I want to ask you something though, because what you were talking about there reminds me, in your show, in and of itself, not to give anything away, but you do have this moment where you kind of like recognize somebody as having an identity, and it's a pretty moving, powerful sequence.
Yeah.
And Paul and I were sort of talking about this, and
which part? The part with the letters or the part with the letters?
This is the part where audience members have picked a label for themselves, and you somehow fucking know what it is. And you're able to sort of name the label they gave to themselves, like in real time in the theater while they're standing there. And it's really like, okay, two things. One is you actually seem to see people in a really profound way. Like I think Paul can do this too. It's kind of animal. Like people feel seen when you're looking at them. But then the second, so that's an interesting thing. I don't know what you're doing there, so I want to know what that's about. Sure. But two, I'm not sure you're actually seeing them who they really are, or you, by seeing them in this way, are now defining them as this kind of thing. Does this make sense? Like you're actually making that guy the nobody. You're making that guy.
And just to explain it so people know, people picked cards that said things like, I am a father, I am a mechanic, I am a feminist, I am nobody. It was cards to define yourself.
And you're somehow able to know this. It's great.
Well, yeah, but like, this is like, it's a good example of like how we retell the experiences we have. Because like you guys are clearly very smart and like this is the subject we're talking about. But like in the retelling of what you witness, you're describing the mechanics of the experience and not not the actual event that occurred, which was people were seen by someone else. People saw themselves one way, and I recognize them for who they are. And that act of seeing someone as they'd like to be seen, which in the show I say is true identity is that which exists within one's own heart and is seen in another. And then I just do that. Like that's the event that I, hope occurs. But what happens is in painting that picture for people, we end up leaning on the anecdote of we walk in and there's cards. And so the thing that's being transmitted, like from me, like, and in the effort of trying to do things is to try to communicate something or to try to do something which we don't do, which is just fucking look at someone and see them for who they are in a theatrical context to reveal, the lack of that in our everyday life is so much that just that doing that in a theatrical context is meaningful in a way that is kind of unexplainable and it just speaks to the poverty we experience in day-to-day life.
It's missing in everything else. Yeah.
Of seeing and being seen. So I think that it is a powerful experience for people because no one gives us permission to. It's cheesy. It's cheesy. It's a cheese, like the high wire act of doing that. If you understand like storytelling and theater and shows and performance and stuff. Like it sounds horrible on paper. Like nothing about that should work. And the dance of like, yeah, I mean, it sounds like a bad, and if taken the wrong way, like could be compared to anything from Tony Robbins or some
like
sort of
a cheesy psychic or something,
or cheesy psychic, or just a magic show, which is often the case.
A trick,
and it's funny because like now I'm just kind of like I find it humorous to like I've made it a point to constantly try to just tell the truth and have people deny it for themselves, be like, tell them what's going to happen, and they're like, that's not going to happen, and then it happens, and because it creates a conflict within us, because like then now we're grappling with our own beliefs in a way, rather than it's not how did he do that, it's like why didn't I believe that? Like he told me what's going to happen, I didn't believe him, and then it happened. Like nothing about this was a lie. I created that lie by not believing him. So I try to like take something that's true and then wrap it in something that I know that you will, in a theater context, I say literally, like, I understand this is a theater and I'm going to be saying things and they've all been written down and rehearsed and blah, 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 blah. So I don't expect you to believe anything that you see or hear, and knowing you won't believe me, that's the only reason I'm going to tell you the truth. And I say that. I even say that to them at the beginning. And they still go, oh, sure, we're going to see. Yeah, all right. I'll be the one to decide which.
Yeah.
But that's the thing. I'll be the one to decide what's true here. Yeah. I'll be the one to decide what's real here. And all we can do is be honest and help make, as back to that, like creating a truth for reality, for each other. Like the thing about that last experience of seeing people and people being seen is because like, I don't think you can't fight to be seen. You can only do your best to see others. Like you could put on a colorful outfit and make a lot of noise.
Sure. That's a good point.
And fight to be seen. But the thing that you really have control over is seeing others.
Yeah.
And that act of generosity in this day and age of really seeing other people is all we can do. And the irony is, if we all did that, if we worried about seeing each other more and
we'd be seen,
being seen less, we would all feel seen more.
Less. But there's a lot of like fighting to be seen.
But
it's the priority.
Absolutely. And I think that's always been the case. And now we're seeing, we're seeing a culture recognizing it publicly and like grappling with it publicly, where it used to be private. And, if you're not seen, just close the door. We'll pretend you aren't here and you could live in the basement and we're not going to talk about you.
Yeah.
But now people are able to, hey, I'm here. And we don't want to have that conversation because it requires us to actually fucking do something and be active. And from the very beginning of the show, the words in the show, in the live show, which is slightly different. The very first words in the show were, I am here and you see me. And it was the most honest thing I could think of. And it also
was a challenge too, in a way.
And my attempt to slowly build an awareness that seeing someone is not a passive experience. You're actively deciding in that moment what they or it
constantly
is.
Yeah,
constantly. You are constantly, instead of allowing it to be seen, allowing yourself to see it as it's presenting itself without whatever judgments.
And the fight to be seen thing that happens so much in social media then puts you in the position of kind of madly constructing a self you want to be seen. That's not really, it doesn't really work. It's
like curating yourself.
Curating yourself in this fucking crazy way.
Which is the cave. And we, us picking up the sticks and being the puppeteers, but like not understanding like that we're doing it, not this, just having a lack of awareness that we're even digesting these fictions or presenting them without being aware of it. And it's hard too. Like I went on Stephen Colbert's show and I realized way too late that it was like show business. Like, I mean, it was just like, I just went on and had a conversation like this. And I don't even know how they aired it. Like, I don't even know. it's the dullest.
No, it's interesting. No,
I can't.
But I hear you. I hear you. And it's like, but there's a whole set
funny,
of, yeah, right. But they're comedy shows. That's what they are. And it's a huge business, and it's a comedy show.
You forget because it's like you experience these things as life, and then you participate in them still as a living person experiencing life, but then you're confronted with like, oh, this is not like, this is a totally different thing.
Yeah. That's a whole other venue. It's a whole other dramaturgy going on about how you're supposed to fucking behave. And it's like, and I'm tempted a lot of the time to do what you did, which is just go, fuck it. I'm actually going to turn this into something it's not. Or not to fuck with it, but to actually function in some other way within it is would be interesting. And is interesting. I would actually wonder that what you did isn't actually really interesting to watch.
I don't know, but I just know that it's not right for television.
And you've never been asked back again.
I just know
it was bad television.
Of course it's bad television. I also think that like we haven't created. I mean, there are literally like philosophers in Europe who fill stadiums.
I know.
That doesn't exist here.
No.
I mean,
I want to just run one more topic by you, both of you guys, to see what you think of it. Is when I was reading your book and you talk a lot about deception, I was realizing that some people consider that people who deceive well are very smart. Like it takes a certain level of intelligence to perform deception like effectively. And kids cannot deceive. Like below like 4 or 5 years old, kids don't do deception because they think that your mind has the same information that their mind has. So they can't fake you out. They don't think they can fake you out because they think you know the same that they do. And some people on the autism scale also have a hard time with deception too. And I guess I was just wondering, what do you make of this? Like, it's kind of an open-ended question.
Age, I guess, has something to do with it, but only in the sense of the time allowed for the acquisition of knowing things and knowledge, I guess, because I have found that children are more difficult to deceive than adults. Really? I don't know if it's the same reason that they are unable to deceive other than just they don't have time to get good at it. But but watching a child watch a magic show is very interesting. And there are some people, a very few, but who have turned performing for children into some sort of artistry that is a whole
other level.
Just really? Absolutely incredible. And it's because they tap into their mind, not the mind of an adult. And the reason, I guess in simple terms, in my experience, is like, if you pretend to put a coin in your hand and you're actually holding it in the other hand secretly, the event of the simulated action of putting that coin in the other hand is what deceives you in terms of like, oh, they put a coin in the other hand, and now you have a model in your head, even though you don't see the coin, you understand that there's a coin, in their hand. Because you understand like how a body moves and what it is to have an object in your hand and then place it in another hand. But children haven't figured all that stuff out yet, and they don't have an innate sense of what those actions are like, and their attention spans are shorter. And so to create that mental model inside their brain is actually difficult, because you may put a coin, in your hand or want them to believe that, and then they start looking at the gum on their shoe, and then they look back up. And also like they might not know how things shouldn't.
Yeah.
An adult can look at an empty hand, or what they perceive as an empty hand, and go, that hand is clearly empty because its fingers are open. There's no way of holding a thing in that hand. I know that because I've tried holding things with my fingers open, and that's not possible.
That's amazing.
But a child
but a kid
might
doesn't
look
know
at
that. Yeah.
A hand with fingers
it's still
open.
Possible to,
and
they're like, what?
They are not constrained by their knowledge of life and experience.
That's cool.
And so it allows them to see through the artifice because they aren't encumbered by their own knowing, their own
that's fascinating.
Preconceived knowledge. And so that's a good reminder for everything in that, like, recognizing that, like, what else am I being deceived by because I believe I understand how this thing functions, rather than not having an awareness of your knowledge and just allowing yourself the possibility to think that maybe there's something on the other side of that veil that there's no way it could be there, but I'm going to allow myself to believe it might be because that's the world we live in. We live in a world where the thing that you think couldn't possibly happen the next day or the next moment or be there, it sometimes is, and allowing ourselves the opportunity to believe in that, I think is what allows us to, like, cope with the uncertainty and maybe and hopefully discover things that we wouldn't have otherwise discovered because of our certainty.
That's a good place maybe to draw it to a close. That's awesome. Yeah. Thank you so much, Derek.
Thanks, Derek. I really appreciate it.
Guys, I hope to keep in touch. You guys have
I likewise. I was thinking the same thing. I'd like to too.
Chinwag is a production of Treefort Media and Touchy Feely Films. Hosted and executive produced by Paul Giamatti and Stephen Asma. Executive producers for Treefort are Kelly Garner and Lisa Ammerman. Dan Carey is executive producer for Touchy Feely. Our series producer is Rachel Whitley Bernstein. Our associate producer is Andrew Miller. Original theme music by Luke Top, with additional music by Via Mardot. Oscar Guido is our executive in charge of production. Tom Monahan is head of audio for Treefort. Animation created by Alex Sokol. Audio production, supervision, and editing by Maxwell Carney. Additional audio assistance and mixing by Jeff Neal, with additional production management from Renee Levesque. Clara Wong is Celestial Empress of Benevolent Knowledge. Lastly, for more information, go to chinwagpod.fm and find us on Instagram or TikTok at chinwagpod or on Twitter at chinwag_pod.